Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 40th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So to be completely honest, if I had decided this order based on what my favorite listening experiences, Enter the 36 Chambers almost definitely would have been first, which you could probably tell by my channel name. However, I did a Wu-Tang affiliated album as my third review, so I opted to hold off until I did albums like Illmatic and Ready to Die, some of the other big fish. From what I can gather, it seems like albums like Paid in Full or Illmatic are hailed as slightly more influential than the Wu-Tang debut, but their movement was so huge in its own right that they undoubtedly have one of the top 5 most influential albums to come from New York hip hop in the 90s. Again, this was before my time, so maybe I'm wrong and the general consensus was Wu-Tang was the best. I definitely think they have the best aging albums from the early 90s, probably up there with The Chronic. While the latter is definitely more polished and tightly mixed, the infectious yet dusty aura Wu-Tang's first album gives off is an experience I never find tired or dated. There may have already been some groups in hip hop at the time, but outside of Arrested Development, I can't really think of any in the early 90s that had as many members as Wu-Tang. This diverse roster of talented MCs who each had their own unique style and personality became easily the most successful group of their size in the history of the genre. There's other dope crews with lots of members worth mentioning that came a little later, like Joey Badass's old group Pro Era or Odd Future, as well as Weatherman and of course Boot Camp Click, which was a supergroup consisting of Rockness Monsta and Sean P. from Helta Skelta, Tech and Steel of Smith& Wesson, and the various members of Black Moon. I suppose you could count Native Tongues in there as well, but to my knowledge they didn't release any projects as a group, so I wouldn't put them in quite the same category. Either way, while all those crews had something to offer, what made Wu-Tang such a special outfit was how much virtually every rapper stood out, which was further solidified by the myriad of classic solo albums they released. I'm not going to go too deeply into these, but some of my favorites I have on vinyl include both of ODB's solo albums, Iron Man and Sour Soul by Ghostface Killah, Method Man's debut Tikal, GZA's Liquid Swords, not to mention the number of Wu-affiliated projects like Gravediggaz or the Blackout albums Meth and Redman did. Keep in mind, there's multiple solo albums I don't have that are definitely essential, I just haven't been able to find them yet, and those aren't actually all the albums I have in my collection, those are just some of the favorites I wanted to share. There's also the massive double album they released in '97, Wu-Tang Forever, which has many classic moments and sees the grimy production get a bit cleaner while still remaining dark and distinct to RZA. RZA is Wu-Tang's in-house producer, and he not only made all of the beats for their classic group projects, but he fully produced the vast majority of the solo classics I mentioned as well. His dusty, old kung fu flick-inspired production was the anchor for virtually every Wu-Tang Clan release in the 90s, and he produced so many classic albums over the years it's downright staggering. He's also an insanely dope MC, and he has one of the more idiosyncratic styles and deliveries of the group, which gives a great contrast with the rest of the unique cast of characters. Another key figure in the Wu is Ghostface Killah, who has pretty much always been my favorite Wu-Tang member personally. ODB would definitely be an insanely close second. However, Wu-Tang Forever only had a handful of ODB appearances, and it was the last project by the group he would be involved with. So due to his tragic death, his output is pretty limited, opposed to Ghostface, who's released classic albums in every decade since he came onto the scene. Some of my other favorite members have to include RZA, since he not only is the glue that holds the crew together, but as I mentioned, his style as an MC is incredibly unique. GZA the Genius has to get a nod as well as arguably the densest and most technically proficient writer in the whole crew. And you also have to shout out Inspector Deck, as he would often start off many of their group tracks, and they gave him this role time and time again because of his insane first verses on songs like Protect Your Neck or Triumph. I feel like I already talked about Raekwon the Chef a good amount in my Cuban Links video, but there's still a number of other talented members like Method Man, who arguably is the most famous Wu-Tang member, as well as U-God, Master Killa, and Capadonna, who were all up to par with their lyrics and had a distinct style to add. Together, they brought a whole new energy to the game, and their grimy, bass knocking cypher tracks became a worldwide sensation. In a crew with only one rapper, they're liable to just coast along because they know nobody's going to lyrically outshine them. With Wu Tang, there was such a high standard for quality control that regardless of which members you personally prefer, it's hard to deny that virtually everyone involved tried their very best with every appearance they had on here. For example, Master Killa only has one verse on this first album, and he was clearly the least experienced and rehearsed MC in the group during its early days, but instead of just gassing him and telling him he was amazing, or just tossing him to the curb, they were honest and helped work with him to find the flow and delivery that matched him best. I truly think every member of the Wu could have made it on their own as solo artists if the clan never existed, though admittedly, it's hard to imagine what a lot of these projects would be like without the RZA beats. But still, I feel like sometimes people underappreciate just how lucky and unlikely it was that all these amazing minds would be born in the same area at the same time with the same interests. We already marvel about how privileged we are to have groups like A Tribe Called Quest, NWA, or Ghetto Boys, where I get that same feeling of appreciation for the fact they were born in the right time and place. But again, outside of a couple of the ones I mentioned at the beginning, there aren't many groups from this era like Wu-Tang where all these stars happen to align to give us not just one of the best debut albums in hip-hop, but a top 3 hip-hop group of all time for my money. This album pretty much single-handedly popularized a style in hip-hop that countless younger artists would adapt, which was the grimy, purposefully unpolished approach they took, especially on this first album. The modern boom bap inspired New York scene that's been dominating the underground the last decade is without a shadow of a doubt the product of RZA's influence. They still put their own spin on it, but even these artists would tell you their reverence for Wu-Tang is higher than anybody. Guys like Westside Gunn, Benny the Butcher, Conway the Machine, Rock Marciano, Ka, and even Billy Woods all reference Wu-Tang lines and projects. Some of them have even worked with members of the Wu. That lo-fi minimal sound guys like Rock Marcy and Ka specialize in is just as inspired by 36 Chambers as it is Illmatic or Ready to Die, maybe even more. The Shaolin influence RZA showed on the first album resulted in most of the albums he did in the 90s having similar reference material. However, it doesn't just work for those projects. He had one of the best production runs in hip-hop through these solo albums. The way RZA and the various members of Wu-Tang would repackage the old kung fu samurai movie style into a new, refreshing experience sort of reminds me of the type of thing Doom would later do with his supervillain persona. Somehow RZA seemingly can't run out of fire sample material, and if you look at some of the more obscure samples he used for the debut, it's pretty impressive, especially with how early they still were in hip hop's lifespan. While everyone would hone their skills over the years, this being their first album made them work especially hard on 36 Chambers since they didn't know if they were ever gonna get another chance. What this resulted in was brilliant skits that range from funny to tragic, dozens of killer verses that never get old since they always switch up, and an unmistakably hungry approach. It being more raw and dusty sonically also helps put you into their world, and it makes you feel like you're sitting next to them on a park bench on Staten Island listening to the cipher. For my top 3 favorite tracks here, it was slightly easier than normal because despite a flawless track list, it's much shorter than the average album. That being said, those would be Wu-Tang Clan Ain't Nothing to Fuck With, Protect Your Neck, and Tears. For honorable mentions, I have to go with Bring the Ruckus, Wu-Tang's Seventh Chamber, The Mystery of Chess Boxing, Cream, Can It All Be So Simple slash Intermission, and Method Man. Thank you for watching my 40th video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite moments off 36 Chambers are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.